GM, and welcome to Moloch Traps, our latest podcast here at From A to Z. I'm Z-Fi, this is Zombie Shepherd, and we're excited to be bringing you this new show in collaboration with BanklessDAO and its audiovisual team. To be clear, opinions in this series expressed by either of us are our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of BanklessDAO at large. This week, we will continue to study and discuss excerpts from the Meditations on Moloch essay written by Scott Alexander. The essay provides examples of multipolar traps, and it delves into various instances from history, biology, and economics to illustrate how competition often results in collective harm. In today's episode, we'll discuss the idea of the race to the bottom. Let's start with Alexander's words on this theme. The race to the bottom describes a political situation where some jurisdictions lure businesses by promising lower taxes and fewer regulations. The end result is that either everyone optimizes for competitiveness by having minimal tax rates and regulations, or they lose all their business, revenue, and jobs to people who did, at which point they are pushed out and replaced by a government who will be more compliant. Even though the last one has stolen the name, all these scenarios are in fact a race to the bottom. Once one agent learns how to become more competitive by sacrificing a common value, all its competitors must also sacrifice that value, or be outcompeted and replaced by the less scrupulous. Therefore, the system is likely to end up with everyone, once again, equally competitive, but that sacrificed value is gone forever. From a God's eye view, the competitors know if they all will be worse off if they defect, but from within the system, given insufficient coordination, it's impossible to avoid.
Yeah, this one is, we see it in the United States from state to state. We see it from county or parish to county, we see it on the global scale with, manufacturing moving from country to country. And yeah, so this one is definitely one that, it did steal the name Race to the Bottom in a sense, because they are all races to the bottom, like he said. Like the fish farming thing, like you can never really take back the pollution. Once you start polluting the lake, that's it. There's no taking it back. There's no undoing the pollution. Adding the fish filters after the fact, well, you're just slowing it down. It'll always be a race to the bottom, and the lake will only get worse. It'll just not get worse as bad as you farm less.
Right. But there's no incentive to farm less, so everyone's trying to destroy it quicker than the other person so they can get theirs.
Right.
That's the race.
Any efforts that you make to slow it down, like depolluting the lake, are actually just so that you can prolong the farming process. So that's why it's a race to the bottom, but there are obstacles that sometimes slow down the speed at which you descend. And I think that that's something that's arguable within a lot of these systems. Is everybody says that a new emerging market actually fixes things, and new jobs, new housing. It's why we're always building. The GDP growth has to come from somewhere. So we're constantly expanding in new ways. But really, it's not actually real value that's being created anymore. It's literally just paper value. It's literally doing the job, doing the construction, just because these buildings will be vacant in less than 10 years. They will be unused. The construction is just for the sake of the construction. And it's all these boom bust periods. We've talked about in other episodes whale fall, and that's kind of what a lot of this is you have big, war is the biggest whale fall in a sense, because war brings a lot of production, a lot of food, a lot of weapons, a lot of spending, and then like peace comes and it's like market goes down, and you know what I mean?
And it's all part of a bursty cycle. You get all this ramped up and then it comes down.
But The point about the race to the bottom is that those ramps up are an illusion, because when you come back down, you'll be lower than you were last time. You're always reaching new lows. That's why it's a race to the bottom.
And the other thing is the things that you sacrifice on that race to the bottom are sacrificed forever. There's no getting them back. If we, given our current situation, if we're going to optimize for profit and we extract all the resources we can find, there's no replenishment. There's no going back. There's no getting back what we lost. There's no suddenly, yeah, I'm going to respect the environment now because it's only pavement. What is there to respect?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, in the most literal examples of what I kind of took some notes about this, and we can get very metaphorical with it, but maybe we should save that for later in the episode
All
instead
right.
of.
All right.
Yeah, I should be more like literal with some of the things I was thinking about this. So, in the late 1970s, most American manufacturing began migrating to Asian countries in a race to the bottom on labor and production costs. So, we actually lost the American manufacturing class because it was cheaper to do these things in other countries. And it wasn't just Asian markets, but it was Central and South American markets as well, and anywhere that they could get cheaper labor. And it didn't matter because like what the cost of that labor, meaning like a lot of these places, it's literally been found to be like akin to slave labor. Essentially, it's like sweatshops and things that are very harsh to the workers' living conditions. So that's how you're able to get these cheap products that started being manufactured en masse in the late 70s, the 80s, the 90s, while you're seeing American workers lose their jobs and all these factories move out of the country. It was in this race to the bottom for labor in production. So that's where
Driven
cheap.
by demand.
Right.
People want cheap goods. So that's
Yeah. I
our
mean,
own accidentally creating Moloch.
it's driven by the Walmarts and the Targets of the world. And you know what I mean? Like, it's when you say like, I don't want to pay a higher price for something, I don't care about the quality of it, I'll take cheap plastic. Well, hey, guess what? It's cheaper for us to make garbage in another country for dollars a day on the labor and then ship it overseas because hey, you're demanding it. Exactly. Like, we didn't really think about the externalities of like what it cost. And when you do think about it, like, you don't put two and two together. You get mad because the jobs have left to go to China, but then you go and buy the TV anyway, because what else are you going to do, not have a TV? Like, or really in some
Or
cases.
maybe that cheap one is the only one you can afford because the job you used to have, you lost.
Well, not just that, but like that TV isn't made in America anywhere anymore. It's not like some of the factories went out of business and others didn't, because in the race to the bottom, everyone has to sacrifice values, and those values will never be returned, which is why the manufacturing jobs are never coming back to America. It just will never make sense because of the cost of living, because like the living wage, and that's why the minimum wage is what it is, and we don't have a living wage, because America is at the cost of its citizens' lifestyles and quality of life, saying that we will suppress wages because we need to be able to compete with the global market. And that means maximum, like, and the thing is that we can't compete in the global market because we're literally not even making the products. So that's why, in order for CEOs to take home billions a year in bonuses and in their pay, they have to take it from somewhere. And the only place that we've seen that chart where you watch like the wage of the employee stay basically stagnant for the last 30, 40 years, where you've seen corporate profits go off into the moon.
Right. That diversion or that separation.
Right. And this was part of it, is like the manufacturing leaving and shareholders being the number one thing, not the workers and not even the quality of the products that are being produced at that point. It didn't matter anymore. This is also when you start to see the very beginnings of like pensions being no longer a thing, like where you start to see like you know, after the boomers, and I guess they would have had these jobs in the 70s and the 80s, and a lot of those people ended up in the 90s getting fired before their pensions could kick in and getting let go from these companies. So all the things that they were promised, and that's what I was saying in another episode, where like you become a grudger because the things you were promised never came to be. Well, that's one of those things. A lot of these pensions just straight up disappeared because the corporations spent them. They gambled them away. They did whatever they wanted to do with them. And they fired people on whatever grounds, and you had no money to go fight it in court. And a lot of these people just never received their pensions, and it all went down the toilet. And the people they hired after that, in a race to the bottom in our own country, when younger people are hired in jobs, they're never offered that same pay rate that the older person was. And so the
Oh
rate
no,
is
it's a
always
reset.
it's always constantly going down because we can always get somebody younger and dumber that needs an opportunity and get rid of the person who's in their mid 30s, mid 40s, who actually knows a little bit about this industry. You got to go. You know the game, and we need somebody that we can just like take advantage of on wages. We don't care if the product of the quality of work might suffer, because not because the younger person doesn't know anything, but they're inexperienced and they should be working with someone who has experience. And this is how you like pass on knowledge in trades. But when it becomes this race to the bottom for wages, then you don't even keep around the more experienced, expensive person long enough. And I mean, either way, like we're not talking about literally training people to take your job, because a lot of people do that, but it's more like this idea that like like a younger person should be working alongside an older person and gaining that experience, so that one day when that older person leaves the job, not because they were forced out, like
It's that apprenticeship.
exactly, mentorship, apprenticeship, and none of that really exists anymore at the employee level. At least none of that, like that's only for like well-to-do people. That's only for people who can, whatever. That's a whole other thing. But um but yeah, so that's one thing that came to mind, was that race to the bottom. And then um on the more local level, there's California and New York, which you kind of brought up. And it's really interesting, I found, with those, because right now we are seeing some people leaving California to go to Texas, for instance, like Texas, Tennessee. There's certain places that people see as like really ripe, I guess you'd say.
They're chasing those regulations, those favorable regulatory and tax environments.
Right. The interesting thing though is that like with California and New York, at least, we could be maybe seeing a bigger change in that now, but with California and New York, we've still seen like a lot of people willing to deal with that regulation and extra taxation of being in those places, because it's like there's some other quality to it, almost like Bevelin Goods, where just being in Los
Right.
Angeles or being in New York City is this thing that's worth paying all this extra, jumping through the extra hoops. And
It has to be the most important thing to you to live in those places, because the cost to do so is so much. It's comparatively, it's like an outlier to almost all other places.
right. You either have to be doing it for personal reasons or because you're able to make a quality of business and trades there that you couldn't do if you lived elsewhere. So, but that's got to be the minority of people that live in these areas. Like most people are hoping and dreaming to be able to like sustain living there, and they're doing it at the expense of whatever to do that. Where like, um, yeah, like they are major hubs, but I think that there's an extra human layer to the value perception of these areas. You know what I mean? Because it's not even all of California and all of New York State. It's literally New York City. And even within that, there's some places you'd rather be than others. And then in California, it's really like, San Diego, Los Angeles, and the surrounding area. And San Francisco Bay Area and the surrounding, towns there. So like you think about those are like the hubs, I guess, or whatever. That's what really, so that is kind of a weird, they're like outliers in a sense. And that is getting into like a conversation about value and perceived value and what things are actually worth and why people are willing to um pay a lot for things that don't have the like practical value that you would think people jump to. And that's kind of the race to the bottom, is that you're always going to go for practical value. But I think that that's kind of how New York and California are a bit of outliers. And the next 4 episodes are going to be outliers, or however we divide the next few episodes, because these aren't races to the bottom. They're instead these almost like flywheel effect negative loops that still produce a lot of waste and are very inefficient, but somehow they keep themselves afloat.
It's as if there was a race to the bottom, and at some point, a system developed to sustain this just above the bottom cycle of
To keep it
just keep
going.
going, just perpetuating the cycle. I
Yeah.
guess to no real end other than maybe extraction, but it just perpetuates itself before going to zero.
And yeah, just to tease those real quick and not keep people in the dark, that's going to be education, science, Congress, and government corruption. And so we're thinking about how to divide these exactly, but those are the things that have these flywheel effects where for some reason they're not racing to the bottom. They've found their thing that makes them still work even though they're actually negative sum games. Somehow they've created an ebb and flow between, somebody's losing.
On the micro scale, everything on the micro scale seems to be working. This game, this interaction works, and this interaction works, and this interaction works. But obviously, if you zoom out, you can look at the system from a god's eye view and go, "Yikes,
Exactly.
that ain't working."
Yeah, so I think there is kind of, I don't understand why California and New York, and like I said, it's the perceived value. Maybe in a lot of ways, like maybe these regulations, not even maybe, a lot of these regulations are probably to force people out so that you can get a higher quality of person to take up that space. Like it
Mm.
is gentrification in a sense. Yeah. Like you make sure that, which is strange because you still need waiters and waitresses and maids and all the other people that you look down upon, but you don't want them to have a place to live. That's a
This is the same issue we end up with industry or power generation. It's just that not in my backyard type thing. Yeah, we want to make sure that we've got waiters, but I don't want to see them in my neighborhood. You know,
right.
it's like a cognitive disconnect.
Yeah, and I mean the other part of it, I guess, is the perceived race to, or a flight to quality, let's call it. So, and these are like ways that a race to the bottom can kind of be slowed down. It's kind of what I was saying before, and it's like maybe places like New York and California are so overly regulated because they think that they can like use that regulation to have a nicer place and a nicer environment. Like that's actually the overt like messaging behind these things. It's like stricter carbon emissions, stricter, all the, taxes on a lot of businesses because that tax revenue goes to social services in those places that other states don't provide. And also the other big part of it is that California and New York really pay for a lot of the country. Like when you think about the tax revenue that comes in from those places specifically, they're footing the bill for a lot of states that literally don't bring anything to the table. And a lot of those states are very anti-socialism, but they wouldn't have any government money if it wasn't for all these, overly regulated states that, bring a lot to the table.
And that's another zoom out God's eye view perspective that changes the perception of particular systems.
Yeah, and so I'm also thinking that like Ethereum and Bitcoin over bonds and fiat are flights to quality. It's a perceived like, hey, the reason we're doing this is because like people would be like, man, Ethereum the rent in Ethereum is high. Have you had to do a transaction on layer one? Like, the rent's high in Ethereum, the rent's high in Bitcoin. But like, man, have you seen the rent on the dollar? Like, it's a flight to quality. When you take your dollars and turn it into something that you feel is safer, you move into a better neighborhood with your little bit of wealth. And um I don't know, that's a stretch, but I don't think so. I think that's definitely what we're kind of seeing, because of the currency debasement race to the bottom, where China and the US are literally seeing like how far they can push their currencies down below each other so that they cancel out their debt. Like, the US is basically trying to erase its debt by printing its way out of it. Like, hey, if the dollar is worth nothing, we can easily pay back $250 billion or whatever the hell. Or like, no, I'm sorry, it's 8 trillion. Where are we at? 33 trillion. I don't even know. These aren't even real numbers. They're not even real numbers at this point. Like, those dollars don't exist. There aren't literally $33 trillion anywhere. And that's just the debt. That just doesn't happen. It doesn't, you know.
I had another approach, a different angle on this when I was doing the prep for this episode, and I was
Okay.
trying to find. You've got a lot of great examples that are like, here are specific examples we can see in our political and state environment in the United States. My mind went to the natural systems. Do we see this race to the bottom happen in systems in nature? Is this something that has expressed itself through human coordination because it expresses itself in, any other number of ways, or is this something that seems to be unique to humans failing to coordinate? And I didn't come up with a lot of great ideas. I didn't come up with a lot of examples. I mean, we talked about this a little bit off air, but the closest I could get is like two populations of animals fighting over the same food source or habitat.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing a little bit with the Malthusian trap. But if both species are trying to get all of that food in that area and one succeeds, both species collapse because all the food for either of the species is gone. If you're over competing to the point where like you've overcompensated, and now not only are you taking this other competing group of animals out, you're sacrificing your own population. But
Invasive
that's about as close
species.
as I could get.
Invasive species do this because when they're not indigenous to an area, the natural things don't have, like, the things that are there from that area don't have a defense to it, and that thing gobbles up all the resources. And so that is a Malthusian thing, but
It's also an ecological race to the bottom as that progresses. If you get an invasive plant, let's say, none of the animals in the area eat this plant. Now you've got a food source that's growing and growing and growing unchecked. There will be a population that goes, I'll eat that, and they'll
yeah,
move in, and maybe the population that moves in to take care of that invasive species takes care of it so well that it cleans out everything, and now there's no plants for any animals to eat. That like you can get swings.
I think animals may not, I don't know, like, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I feel like races to the bottom are almost have to be centered around human activity and
I
markets,
agree.
because animals are just being animals, and they're not, so I guess one big unspoken rule, I think, to the race to the bottom is this idea that you can keep changing sides. The race to the bottom is like
Mm,
anybody who has a higher moral ground will end up losing in the market, or they will end up losing in survival. Meaning, so if you are, this is an extreme example, but if you are the species of war and, you know, raping and pillaging, then you actually not only are you going to kill the men of that species, you're going to impregnate their women and therefore spread that specific group of people further along in the genetic, and I don't think you see this as much with animals. Um, you know what I mean? Like,
I do know what you mean. It definitely seems to be amplified by greed. We
yeah.
see animals in a natural system optimizing for survival, optimizing for species reproduction. They take what they need. They don't, have this hoarding greed mindset that
Well, the
somehow humans
reason
have come to.
Yeah, and it's not that you don't see the violence in the animals. The difference is that the humans who lose in that battle are the ones who are peaceful and optimize for cooperation. And so that's why being a defector, being the one who defects first, is more profitable. Like when you take it back to that primal level, like in that sense, like, and so I think that's why markets are, the basic example of this, because like when you take it to what we're doing now, we're still having this race to the bottom on values, because the person who can, produce food the fastest at any cost, whether it be pesticides, the quality of life of the animals, all of this stuff, everything goes to the wind. So you sacrifice more and more and more values, and it desensitizes us as a species. Like, I actually heard, it's really funny. Schmachtenberger was, I was listening to something he was talking about how, um, when you go from, this is ties into the agriculture. So when you go from a species who lives in conjunction with nature and the animals, you see the animals as creatures that deserve to live. But when you start using animals not just for your food source, that you might respect them as a food source, because as we were talking about, you kind of like don't want to over farm your food source, because you need more buffaloes or more cows or whatever it is that you're eating off of. You leave enough for there to be more. Same thing with fish. Like, that's why you don't overfish. You need enough to make more fish for next year. So um you have that respect for the thing even though you're eating it. But then when you get to the point that you're actually using animals for the tool of like a plow, and you're not just using them for food, but you're using them to increase your food production capabilities, which then in turn makes you money, not just food. Well, now your disconnect from the animal is like, now you become no longer respectful of this thing, but you need to work. It becomes a slave to you. It becomes something that you can abuse, and you no longer have, the same respect for that thing.
And you're using it the way that you're using it to just generate money. You're growing a commodity so that you can turn it into money,
But the race to the bottom is the value of respect towards another creature.
which you'll never get back.
If you don't have respect for the creatures that like provide you sustenance and provide you life, then like why would you have respect, say, for another species of human or another nationality of human, someone that you see as not the same as you and not deserving of life and respect as you are? And so you dehumanize other people, other nationalities, other races, and now you're doing it to each other. And it's all out of this agriculture thing. It's all out of this settling down and being able to other everything else for a profit.
That's how you get CAFOs.
So the race to the bottom is like, we're still in it as a species. Without, like, when it talks about value, it, like, I'm taking it, you could take it either way, but I'm really taking it in the sense of values that we hold dear. Like, you have
Yeah,
to, like, if you want to be a person who's honest, well, guess what? You're going to fail in business.
you're gonna lose. Yeah.
I'm reading a book by Gurdjieff, a philosopher, and there's a section where he talks about his dad and how he talks about what a great guy his dad was and how much of a genius storyteller and his uncanny memory and all this stuff. Great section about him. And then he says at the very end of the chapter, like, my dad failed at business though, and it's because he didn't have the instinct to ever lie or tell or be dishonest with someone. And so for that reason, people did it to him all the time and took advantage of him. And so that is the race to the bottom. If you want to be a person with morals in business, well, you will not be in business very long because your unscrupulous competition will undercut you and will do everything to take you out. And, you know,
I do know. This is the story of my college. This is the story of my degree and immediately abandoning it because the entire accounting industry is like this corrupt, defrauding extraction machine.
oh,
And
man.
I went to school for 5 years to learn business administration and accounting, only to find out in the last 2 years that everyone's cheating, the whole system's corrupt, everyone is letting greed drive everything to the bottom. Like it was just this, whoa. And as the type of person who would prefer to be honest, would prefer to have honest business relationships, I saw right away, this isn't the place for me. I'm not going to make it here.
Right. And I mean that's an interesting one to point out, and I can directly tie that as a one to one with, say, the police and the race to the bottom on values there. You know, I mean, if you want to argue that the police ever had a value system at some point in America, even though it was kind of like built on, directly out of the business of slave catching. But we'll ignore that for a second and just pretend that at some point there was a higher standard for police. The race to the bottom in those police values is that if you are a good cop, you will probably be the one who's most likely to get framed by the rest of your squad. You will get taken down for
Right.
reporting their bad behavior. You will be the one who ends up suffering the consequences because there are cop gangs and there are these things going on that where, well, if you don't take, then like if you don't get involved in the dirty stuff, we can't trust you. So, and it's a race to the bottom on the values there where like, and same thing like with the military, like this one's a slightly different thing, but like we've talked about it before, how a lot of people get into the military because they just want college money. A lot of people who get into the military, at least they used to, more than so than now, but because they wanted to kill, and so it's already a race to the bottom on values there where you think you're getting into for these certain reasons, and then it's really like a disguise for all these other reasons, which we could also talk about the tie to war and capitalism and the whole war machine, and how every time we get into a dispute throughout the world, it's always for these big values. We're always like protecting some kind of democracy or freedom, but then on the back end we're actually like taking money from those countries. We're installing in, uh, shaky governments that we can go and disrupt whenever we want, and we can have excuses to just take more oil and take more resources and bomb these countries back into the Stone Age.
Join our system or we'll squish you.
Yep. I mean, and that's if you want to get into the conspiracy theory of what those systems are, but it's definitely all about the dollar, baby. Like so it's a race to the bottom. Like when people, get all like nostalgic or whatever you want to call it, and they're like, the world used to be better. There's, like if you ever believe there was an idealized version, the world's always been, harsh and rough. It's never been the idealized version of whatever. But if you wonder why everything seems to be getting worse, it's because it's all becoming clearer and clearer. And it's because if there's a race to the bottom on the macro of human values and what we used to hold important as a species, and what we now hold as valuable as a species, there is a race to the bottom. And you can look at it in our attention. Like we want things to be 11 seconds long and super entertaining. There was a time where a painting was entertaining. There was a time where we could actually watch a 2-hour movie and not have to be on our phone the whole time. But now we're in that like hyper stimulated race to the bottom on our attention, where I've got a movie on the computer screen and I'm scrolling on Instagram at the same time. And, like, all of our values have raced to the bottom. And I don't want to be like super nihilistic or pessimistic about it, because I think that has largely been it's a pendulum, and we could swing that other direction if we start to reconnect with ourselves as a species and individually. Like, if we really start to reconnect and swing that other direction of like being in tune with reality and being in touch with, not letting this bombardment of information, education, the multiple crises that are going on throughout the world, you can't let it all get you to the point where you have a personal race to the bottom on values, and you literally give up on everything because it's too impossible to care about anything, you know? Because it's like, once you start caring about one thing, you become aware. You talk about food sovereignty, you talk about money sovereignty. Next thing you know, you're like, well, how can I get internet sovereignty? How can I make sure that my power doesn't go off? You get like,
That's the right direction, though. That's the right direction to be thinking.
yeah. And you really, and then does get you also very scared, because you're like, man, if I'm in any nation state, I am powerless to that nation state. There's no, you know they're coming, they're coming to the degree that they can. And then it does make you paranoid about, not just the big things like Google and stuff like that, but it does even make you paranoid about crypto, because you do have to worry, like, if you take all of your value out of one system and put it in another, can they just turn that system off? And like, obviously, we know, as crypto people, we believe in, sufficient decentralization. But if they literally just turn off the internet, everybody's in trouble.
Here it
And
is. The internet is the choke point, and power grids are the other failure point. It could go down for any number of reasons. Overload, too many people using it. We could have storms come through and weather affect power grids. All of a sudden, you got blackouts and brownouts. We've seen that numerous times. Could have bad actors, whether it's cyber warfare or physical warfare or whatever.
and then you could just have regulatory capture.
True. Yeah, that's another one. That's another one I wouldn't even put on this list. I wouldn't have thought to put on this list. Regulatory capture. But there's the outlier events like solar storms. We could lose our planetary grid if when the next large scale solar storm blows through. We've seen this before. It happened when we had telegraphs, and it blew up telegraphs all over, melted wires, destroyed equipment. It wreaked havoc on the telegram system, which was essentially nothing, right? Imagine what it'll do when we've got our entire world's communication, entertainment, industry, commerce, everything runs on the internet. One storm shuts off the internet for the entire planet, shuts off power for the entire planet. Then what?
Yeah. I mean, those are big existential threats that we can't ignore, but
But you also can't get totally overwhelmed and ruin your life thinking about them.
exactly. And that's kind of like, you can't ignore these things. You have to be aware. You have to do everything you can to be mentally, physically, whatever you have to do to feel good about living in this world, and continuing to do the best you can to improve it. I really do think that, honestly, it just, as a species, if we're going to make it out of these multiple crises that are going on and all these things, it's going to involve cooperation on a scale we've never seen. And it's not going to be cooperation that comes through authoritarianism. It's not going to be, I don't see, yeah, I just don't see how, like, we're not going to force people violently into a better world. So it really comes down to everybody on an individual basis creating a better world, because that will create the effect. That will be, I've talked about it with corporations before. Like, corporations put 70% of the pollution in the world. People work for the corporations. If each one of those people change their tune, and the corporation would have to change its tune because a corporation is made up of individuals, and all it takes is individuals everywhere standing up at every layer that they can to tell whoever's directly above them, no, I won't race to the bottom, I won't break the law, I won't. And it even means worker solidarity, because it means that they can say, well, I'm going to replace you with somebody younger and dumber who will work for a lower wage and get the same output one way or another, or I'm going to get some AI and some automation involved. And it does take like the solidarity for us all to stand together and be like, no, we won't race to the bottom. And it starts at the bottom, because the bottom is where the race is going lowest. You know what I mean? Like, that's the point. The bottom is the tip of the spear when you think about it this way. And so that's why, as a species, if we don't take care of the lowest rung of people on the ladder, then we will all die. Not to be like totally doomer about it, but that's essentially it.
That's big.
Right. Like, the survival of our species involves the survival of our species. There's nobody left out of that. You know what I mean? Like, you can't select for.
From another perspective, too, we have to value our species. In order for us to want to help our youngest and oldest and weakest and whatever, we have to value them. And if we're deciding we don't want to help them, we're deciding not to value them. And that doesn't check for me.
Yeah, we have to value other species as well. It's like optimizing not just for humans, but for the animals and for the trees, and optimizing for an environment that actually works balanced and in conjunction with itself. And
We want to keep living, but we also want to live in a place and in a culture that is worth living in.
yeah, absolutely. And it's everything. I mean, it really does go into everything. And when you think about like all of our racial and political issues and our gender issues, and all of these things come down to trying to enforce control over other people because of perceived differences. Think certain people think that they are allowed to cut other people out of the ability to prosper and the ability to make it in this world, and they will do anything to cheat the game to go their direction, simply over, you know arbitrary reasons: nationality, race, gender. But most importantly, the big one that's hidden behind all of those is class. Like, it really does come down to there's a certain class of people at the top that want to make sure that they always retain the top rung. Hierarchies must exist, and they need this system to stay the way it is. There is no equality in that world. The equality means they have to wait in line like a plebe. Equality means that they have the same access to things that everyone does. Not The point of becoming rich is so that you can lock other people out, right? It's to make sure that there's a certain class of people allowed in your vicinity and other people aren't.
Equality sounds nice when you're below that proposed level of equality. But when you're above that proposed level of equality, it doesn't sound so nice. That's a downgrade for you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the VIP section isn't what you buy at the club for $100 a ticket. The VIP section is the section you can't even walk into because you don't even know that door exists. Yeah, race to the bottom. They're all races to the bottom, right? That's
Essentially, yeah. That's the sacrifice. That's that race to the bottom. These values that we keep giving up for optimizing for capital is what Moloch feeds on. That is the fuel that Moloch feeds on.
Yeah, I mean, the Malthusian trap, you're racing to the food sources run out, or like we said, you're racing to the bottom on values of having to kill your neighbors for more land and food. So yeah, all of these Moloch traps are basically races to the bottom, whether it be for, you know, the common goods, whether it be for like, the environment, which I guess are the common goods. In the dollar auction, it's like you're basically optimizing to lose less than the next guy. In the prisoner's dilemma, you're willing to defect your values because you can't trust another person. You know what's interesting about a lot of this too is that really it's all a race to the bottom in values and standards, because you're really the only value you can be losing is the value of your own integrity. Like, you're a person who says you have certain values and you care about nature and you care about other humans, but then when you go to work and you go to do business, you see someone slipping and you capitalize upon that so that you can have more money than them and you can get your kid into the school that their kid can't get into now. It's this perceived musical chairs, about with the two income trap, about school district, and about what you can get. And whereas we're going to get into an education, like, so getting your kid into the certain school is going to be important to getting your kid into the next big school, and this whole thing, and then that's going to be them getting the job over the next person. And it's always this, it's a meritocracy in name only, because we know that you basically pay to play and who you are matters, and where you go matters, and who you are when you get there matters. And all of this plays into the ultimate meritocracy that, it's all nepotism. And it's all nepotism, and it's capitalizing on others' loss. So it's a race to the bottom on values. And that's kind of my big takeaway with the race to the bottom. And yeah, what are you thinking?
My biggest takeaway was realizing that or coming to the almost certainty realization that this is specifically a human coordination failure. Not finding examples elsewhere was very eye-opening. I mean, on one hand, it paints humans as not so great, like, hey, we're messing up big time. But on the other hand, it means that the outcome or the ability to change this system also lies with us. So it's encouraging. We can see that the system doesn't work, but it's our system, so we can change it if we all agree and work towards changing it. My biggest takeaway was that potential of being able to fix it.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, you're right. Like, it's unnatural. The whole thing is unnatural in the sense that, like, the race to the bottom is because we're a species that's able to extract on a level that no other species has ever been able to do. And so there's nothing to say that, maybe some dinosaurs did this a long time ago. They figured out how to race to the bottom, and that's actually what happened. But we can't observe that in our current system, because the creature that's forcing all destruction across nature is us. We are the most destructive force, to the point that the only thing we have left to destroy is each other. And so, yeah, it is unnatural. Like you said, everybody has to agree. And I don't think that everybody has to agree on everything. We just have to agree on certain things that stop this from being a race to the bottom. And some of those things are a lot of the things that we've already proposed, as far as like UN regulations and things like that. Like, when you think there's like a global tax where, if one country, like, there would be a global tax minimum of, say, 15%, I think it was. And so if one country was charging, a like an 8% tax, then, and they were based in, say they were based in Indonesia or China, and they were also based in the United States, and in the Asian country, they were only paying 8%. Well, then in the other country, their tax rate would get raised to make up for the amount of tax they're not paying in that other country. So it would become, a way of leveling out this, like, you can't race to the bottom by going to another country, because we're just going to tax you in the other country then. Like, you will get hit with the bill somewhere.
And then in that case, it's an incentive to keep it local. You'd rather be taxing it yourself than to let another country tax business happening from your country.
Right, exactly. Knowing that that money's gonna, yeah, like then you're incentivized to raise your taxes to meet that level, because why would I give you a discount if you're, but there's other politics, I'm sure. There's other politics that come into location as well. So I'm sure that's going to, as we talked about just with like the California, New York thing, some countries you're going to be more, you're going to want to be in, especially if it's not a race to the bottom, like anymore. Some of these things would be like the regulations around war. We've already signed things about like not using nuclear weapons, not using viral warfare, not committing genocide. The problem is a lot of people circumvent these rules, and that's the problem with all regulations. As we said in another episode, is like regulation is only powerful if you can enforce it. Well, how do you enforce it? You have to race to the bottom on the quality of life of your citizens so you can have the biggest army in the world and tell everybody else what to do. Oh wait, I'm the US.
Indeed.
So it's like, when are we going to see human coordination that doesn't require a monopoly on violence and an authoritative top down? Humans want to cooperate, and it definitely involves individuals cooperating, because that's the big fear at the local level that people will tell you is, I need police because what keeps people from robbing my house if there are no police? We're not even trusting of the people that live in our damn cities. So
I have an answer for that, though.
okay.
The thing that'll keep people from robbing your house without police is not hoarding stuff that people want to steal.
Damn.
Surplus.
Oh man. Hold on, you damn Marxist. Hold up a No, I mean, that's the thing is, from a God's eye view, there's simple answers to all this. But what we actually understand from the Moloch Trap series and from other discussions on these things is that nothing is as simple as you think it is. But we have to stop the race to the bottom on values. Once you start to value human life and the environment and your own health, it becomes harder and harder to sacrifice values for, cheap goods and for things that you actually don't hold valuable to yourself. So I think that like it does involve that us as a species on the individual level growing spiritually and growing into it's not about a moralistic thing either, because I feel like that's a lot of the arguments come down to doing the right thing, being of a higher moral standard, and people don't like being preached to as to how you should act and how you should feel about things. But I think if each individual person gets more connected with themselves and the values you actually hold, then you actually couldn't abide by the things that the policies you seem to agree with want to do, because that actually doesn't really vibe with the human spirit. It really is something that you are taught, and it's really something that you get into these nationalistic, my football team has to win mindset, and you think that that allows you to dehumanize other people and other species, or other species aren't humans, but it means you can take away their dignity and quality of life because they're not as important as you and your family and the people that you consider important, which doesn't even extend to your neighbors anymore. So I think it's not advocating for hyper individualism. It's advocating for individualism in this way that, like, if we want to have strong communities of people that come together, then each person has to be made up of a better spiritual fiber and actually care about the environment and the world around them.
Exactly. You have to be mindful enough to know yourself well, and be mindful enough to know your neighbors well. Be social, coordinate, communicate. You're going to be less likely to pollute that lake and take the filter off of your fish farm if your neighbor lives on that lake.
And we're social creatures.
Yeah.
We're social creatures. So if the people around you start doing better, like, then you do better. And I think that is another way in which, like, the mockery of people who try to do things, people who recycle or go vegan or whatever, there becomes this mockery because when somebody is doing something you don't want to do, when somebody's trying to improve themselves and you don't want to do it, the best way that you can like shoot that whole thing is just to make fun of it and act like
Bring them down.
trying. Yeah,
Yeah.
trying is for losers, you know.
You think you're so good and up there on your high horse for doing the right thing? Well, we'll knock you down a few pegs. And then I don't have to do anything hard.
That is the race to the bottom. It's all comes down to values and, you know, not willing to stand up for things you actually believe in because of peer pressure, because of political pressure, because of the world's
Profit motive.
pressure, because of your boss, you know, whatever it is. So I don't know. That's my closing statement. What do you think?
I think that sounds great. I think that was well encapsulated and yeah, a lot of important points in there.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited about, you know, closing out this series and getting on to our next one. I'm super excited about where we're going with this. And I think that, you know, it's been important to go down these traps. And while they feel optimistic, feel pessimistic, we're actually really optimistic about like this knowledge. When you know what a problem is, you can start thinking about how to solve it. And I think not giving up is really important. So thanks for watching today's episode of Moloch Traps. Thanks for being here with us. And we hope you enjoy this series and the next ones that are oncoming. And as always, none of what we say here is legal or financial advice. It might be spiritual or mindfulness advice, but we encourage listeners to do their own research, even in those areas, before making any related decisions. Yeah, I would definitely search your soul before buying a meme coin. You really got to dig deep in that. No, but I'm joking. But seriously, all this is serious stuff to think about. You know, have your own philosophical and moral standings on all of these things, and especially the financial stuff. Got to think about all this. And if you find our content informational, educational, or entertaining and would like to support us, please collect our episodes on tape. 18% of proceeds go back to BanklessDAO. 2% supports tape for hosting our videos, and the rest helps to make From A to Z Productions possible. To stay on top of our weekly series, subscribe to us on BanklessDAO YouTube, and don't forget to like and comment while you're there. We will see you next time, friends.